Hey yo, good day to you all. How are you doing today? I'm so happy to have you here again today, and I know that it's been a very great day for each and every one of us. So, how has it been with you? So, you're welcome to Grief to Grace, that podcast that is here to help you navigate your grief journey and help you move from one stage of your grief journey to the other one. So, in Grief to Grace, we help to take you from being stuck to being unstuck. So, how is your day? Like we always say here, everyone's journey is different. So, don't allow yourself to be pushed. But one thing you must not do is to be stuck in your journey. On that note, I welcome you again to Grief to Grace. And I am Ruth Hephzibah. Today, I have a very interesting and beautiful guest in the house. This is one journey that most times we don't want to go through, especially for men. It's always very difficult to have men go through this grief journey, especially when most people don't know that they are grieving. They see it differently when it comes to men because they see them as someone that is stronger, unlike the women that most times people see as weaker sex and they try to help. But for men, they rarely get the support that they need at the appointed time. And today I have a father in the house, a father who has been through so much, who has been through grief, who has gone through so much in this season. And I want to welcome to Grief to Grace podcast today, Jason Tuttle. Jason Tuttle is a father, is a husband, and he has been able to navigate grief and bring purpose out of it. He is a parent of two kids with multiple mental and physical disabilities. And also, he lost his son suddenly as he passed away from issues related to his needs on January 28th, 2022. And coincidentally, that is my birthday. When I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, on my birthday. That's blessing in disguise, though. So since the day of his son's passing, he has been able to make good use of his grief moments, and he created a Facebook blog, which is Letters to Zachary, and a community on grief that details all of his grief journey as a father and a father or a male that is grieving that lost a child. And also, in the process, he's also launching his book, which is Letters to Zachary, and just so much has been happening with them. And his community is open to all grievers, and he has a story to tell. He has a story to share with every one of us. And this day, I have the privilege to welcome Jesse Tuttle once again to Grief to Grace podcast. So, Jason, how are you doing today?
I am doing well. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I am super excited to have you in the house today. And I know that just like every other story we've heard here, every grief story is different and it should be treated differently. And it has been a healing process, I tell you, for a lot of persons. I get messages almost every day telling me how much these stories that we have been able to help them and also affect their lives positively. Because sometimes people don't know that they are not alone in their journey. Sometimes people just feel grief is channeled to one area, but when they keep hearing of everyone's story, they know that yes, we are not alone. And this is one mandate God has given, and we are here to push it as much as we can. Thank you so much once again for joining us today. So, are you ready to share your story with us today?
Certainly, I would love to share my story with you. Okay, so excuse me, I'm a married father of two special needs kids. I've been married, this year will be 21 years. As kind of a backstory to all the grief stuff, I got married when I was 26, my wife was 29. And at that point, we knew that once we got married, we wanted to start having kids reasonably quickly, just because we were in our late 20s, almost early 30s. Um, we had been married about a year. It didn't take my wife long to get pregnant, and we got excited about the pregnancy. Um, we went to all the doctor's appointments, and everything, as far as we knew it, was fine up through the week 20 appointment. And the week 20 appointment's typically the one where you find out the sex of the child. And during that appointment, my wife didn't want to know the sex of the child, but I did. And we kind of playfully went back and forth. And it got to the time where the ultrasound tech said, "Hey, I'm where I can find out the sex of the child. Do you want to know?" And so we still playfully went back and forth to the point to where we weren't sure what we wanted to do. And then the tech said, "Well, I've found an issue. I need to know the sex of the child." And so immediately at that point, um, we said, "We want to know the sex of the child." She said, "Well, you're having a boy." And I asked her, I said, "Can you tell me what the issue is?" And she said, "Well, no, that's kind of a doctor issue." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "Well, can you tell me why you needed to know whether it was a boy or a girl?" And she said, "Well, if it's what I think it is," she said, "it's rare in boys, but even rarer in girls." So from that point, we started seeing a perinatologist, which is basically a high risk OBGYN that one would see when cases like this come up. We got through the next 18 weeks, which put my wife at about 38 weeks, where she had a C section, and she had our son. And it was that night that we found out that my son was born with a rare condition. Um, the next day, he was transported all the way up to the Children's Hospital on the north side of Atlanta, where I'm at. And he stayed at the Children's Hospital for the next 12 continuous days while they figured out just all the things that were going on. And so, long story short, my son was born with a rare condition called Eagle Barrett syndrome. He was born with severe neurological delays, meaning when he passed at 15 years old, he only functioned about 4 to 6 years old. He was born with epilepsy, which meant he had seizures. He was born nonverbal. Even though he did make slight sounds, he didn't specifically talk. And he could crawl on his own, but he couldn't walk by himself per se. So he was basically wheelchair bound. And at that point, we were seeing 6 specialist doctors every 6 months for my son. So my son was born. He was around for about a year, and then my wife and I decided that we wanted to have another child. And as you can imagine, kind of the backlash that we got, a lot of families said, "Well, why would you want to have another child when you've got a child with all these issues?" Um, we always knew that we wanted another child, and there was no guarantee that the second child was going to have any of these issues. So my wife got pregnant again. We found out we were having a girl this time. And in the beginning, she was considered the normal child just because we were basing her development on my son, which we later found out if we were basing her development on my son and where he was at, she would seem normal, but in reality, she was delayed. Fast forward about another 6 months to a year, we found out that my daughter was born with all of the exact same things my son was born with, except for the rare condition. And she was born 2 years after my son, almost to the day. And to this day, genetics can't figure out why they were born with identical issues at that time. So that was kind of an eye-opening thing, at least in the first. This was all kind of in the first 3 years of our marriage. So we got married, and 3 years we had two kids with multiple disabilities, most of which we had never heard of, most of which we had to figure out how we were going to take care of them, and just kind of the whole process of just daily life. At least at that point, there was a grieving process, just because we went from thinking life was going to be as normal as possible, having kids with normal issues and doing normal things, to all of a sudden kind of that normal life, the carpet getting pulled out from under us. And we had to figure out this kind of newfound life where it was constant doctor's visits, constant hospital stays, constant, specialist visits, that kind of thing. And when my daughter was born, I left my job and became a stay-at-home parent for 12 years because I was the one that took care of both of them with all their physical medical care. So fast forward at this point about 12 years, about 3 days before my son passed away, I started noticing that he was not feeling well. I initially thought it was just kind of a 24-hour virus, which he had had multiple times in his life, and didn't think much about it. Well, the day that I saw it that night, over the next about 12 to 18 hours, he was getting a little bit sicker, but nothing that made me think, hey, I need to take him to the hospital. And so the morning that he passed away, I got him up that morning. You could tell he was really sick. I rushed him to the hospital, and let's see, I got him up at 8:30, and by 10:34 that morning, he had been pronounced in the hospital. He had passed away. We later found out that it was sepsis and cardiac arrest due to sepsis it were the reasons why he passed. Apparently, he got some sort of an infection inside of him. It just went haywire, and we never saw it until it was too late. So that was January 28th, 2022, like you kind of stated in the intro. Initially, for me as a man, my first emotion was anger. Typically for men, that's kind of our go-to emotion. For me, it wasn't necessarily anger towards any one person. It was more of an internal anger. I was the caregiver of my son. I was always the one that took care of him. I was always the one that made him better. I was always the one that there was a couple of times I saved his life from just some severe situations that he was in. And so for this time, for me not to be able to save him like I always do, outside of just losing my son, was a lot to take in. So for months after that point, he passed away at the hospital, and we didn't necessarily have an autopsy done. We were able to get him to the funeral home. We had kind of the service a week or so later, and then we came home to basically an empty house. And like the old statement, the silence is deafening. The silence in this house was certainly deafening. It was certainly something to get used to. In the midst of all of this, I'm a big proponent of therapy and counseling, and I was seeing a therapist and just going over all of my raw kind of anger-filled emotions relating to the passing of my son. And one of those visits, as we were talking, she said, "Have you ever thought about journaling?" And initially I said, I don't know how good I am at journaling. I don't know if that's something I really want to do. And so she goes, "You don't necessarily have to do it right now, but keep it kind of on the back burner." She said, "You can come to it later at any time." She said, "It's a good way to kind of get your emotion out. And so it's not sitting on top of you. And it's a good way to just kind of get it off your chest." Well, that idea kind of sat on my side table for 9 months after my son had passed away. And then one day I was on Facebook watching a reel, and I can't remember what it was, but there was something in there that caught my attention, and it hit emotionally, it just kind of hit me like a Mack truck. I just started bawling because whatever it was, from what I remember, it reminded me of several aspects of my son and kind of his last days, and the time in the hospital. And at that point, I opened a Word document, and in proper Oxford English letter form, I started typing a letter out, and I wrote my raw, unfiltered feelings about just the end of my son's life and the process afterwards, and how I was feeling since he was gone. And I just, for lack of better ways to say it, I kind of verbally vomited on the page. And I did that multiple times a day for weeks, and I saved them because I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with them. I thought I might do something like what we'll eventually get to in this talk, but I really wasn't sure. So I kept writing them, and in the midst of that, I got on Facebook and found a Facebook group, because we all know that Facebook has a group for everything. And I found a group that was parents who had lost a special needs child, which I was kind of surprised to find, because that's a very specific area of grief. I wasn't really looking for it, but I kind of came across it. And I got to know the admin that was in the group, and I was in there for a while. And one day I messaged her and said, "Do you mind if I post one of my journal entries in here?" And she immediately came back and said, "We would love for you to. We get so few men in here posting about their emotions. We'd love to see what you have to say." And right before I posted it, I thought, well, I need to mentally prepare myself. This is the internet, and I could have a very good response just because I'm sharing my emotions as a man, or I could have a negative response. And am I in the mental space at that point to be able to handle people kind of bashing or attacking what I was posting? And I thought about it for a while, and I honestly, in my fashion, I just kind of went, "You know what, forget it. It doesn't matter what they think. People still need to hear it." And so I posted it. Well, I immediately got a massive positive response. I had a lot of women in that group come up to me and say, "We don't know each other. We've never talked to each other. I've never told anybody my innermost feelings, and you have nailed it on the head. You, word for word, you exactly how I feel." And so I said, "Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad I can write something that resonates with you. This is inspired by my son." Well, I kept posting for weeks after that, and I kept getting the same response over and over and over again. And probably about the fifth or sixth time that I posted, I thought, well, hey, I might have something here. I need to kind of build on this. So people in the group initially said, "Well, have you thought about writing a book?" And at the time, I didn't think I had enough material. I do now, but in the beginning, I was just like, I don't even know if I have enough to start a book. And then they kept giving me suggestion after suggestion, and most of them, I just wasn't in the headspace to do it, because I was still under a year grieving, and it was still very difficult for me. And finally, someone came up and said, "Have you ever thought about doing like a Facebook page as a blogger? At least at that point, you can kind of copy and paste, and you don't have to create more material. You can just share it there in kind of a centralized location." And so I thought about it for a while, and I said, "Well, I can do that." So I created Letters to Zachary, and initially, like most pages, I had about 10 or 20 followers, um, friends, family, coworkers, that kind of thing. And I posted for weeks after I started it. And one day I just got this idea that I was going to start emailing some of the big names in the grief community just to ask them, hey, what worked for you when you were building your page? What didn't work? What can you steer me towards, away from, that kind of thing? And all of them gave me great tips, and I used all of them. And from that point forward, it just started building. Uh, and at this point, I'm at 10 months and I've got almost 1,100 followers. Um, I've got representation in 26 countries. I have representation in 44 of the 50 US states. And so it might not be a lot of growth for a big group, but for me to tell me that 10 months ago that I would have all of what I do now, I would have looked at people and said, you're crazy. There's no way.
Hmm.
And I just seemed to hit a nerve in a good way where I was saying what people wanted to hear. Because to backtrack a little bit, when I posted the first post, I put a disclaimer on it and I said, I'm not going to sugarcoat grief. People need to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly of grief. If I feel like in the moment, I need to have an expletive laden letter with F bombs in it because that's just the raw, guttural feeling that I'm feeling in the moments, that's what I'm going to write. People need to see that. And I mean, society and TV does a good job, but that's kind of a rose colored glasses version of grief. Yeah, it tells you that people get sad and melancholy and sorrowful during it, but it doesn't it doesn't really show you the hard side of grief, those days that you don't want to get out of bed and you don't want to deal with people and you don't want
That's
to
it.
talk to people, and you almost want to become reclusive for a little while, or TV doesn't. There are a lot of us in the grief community that during those times, a lot of us have really dark thoughts. 99.9% of us would never act on them. But a lot of us during those times, if you lose a son or a daughter or someone really close to you, those thoughts cross your mind. And, for my case, as a person of faith, even though I might have had those thoughts, my belief system, I could never do that. Uh, those thoughts for me were just ways that I could kind of get it out of my system so it wouldn't just be sitting on top of me. And so I shared some of those in there, and I shared just the downright pain that it is as a father, especially me, in the sense of I was the caretaker of my son. I was around him 24/7, 365. He was nonverbal. We had an unwritten kind of language that we had between us. I could read his body language so well that he didn't even have to tell me what was wrong with him. I could read his body language and I could know what was wrong with him based on how he was acting, sounds he was making, that kind of thing. I got so good at it that there were several times that when I got him into the ER at the hospital, the doctors literally looked at me and go, "We don't know how you did it." And I would go, "How I did what?" You brought your son in literally. We can show you the x-ray. We can literally see the beginning of pneumonia forming in his lungs. We don't know. She said, "This is the closest any parent has ever brought in a child to us. I don't know how you did it." And I just said to him, I said, it was instinctual. It was a sound I heard. It was the way he acted. And so to go from 12 years of 24/7, 365, care to nothing in the blink of an eye, that was a lot to take in. That was a lot of emotion related to it. It was a lot of, um, anger and depression and anxiety. And I mean, I went through the gamut of emotions in the beginning. Um, so I'm getting this page going, and I'm starting to build it, and people seem to be drawn to the fact that I pull no punches when it comes to just saying how I feel on it. Because so much in this world today, people are so fearful of how someone might react based on what you say. And when it comes to grief, I tell people all the time, grief is a collective experience done individually.
Mhm.
So we all at some point will experience it, but the individual experience varies between person to person to person.
That's true.
And then the best analogy I give, let's say we're soccer fans and we're at one of those massive stadiums in, say, England or Spain, where let's say that the stadium itself is grief. Well, let's say that I'm front and center on the front row in the center of the kind of the center of the field view. My view of that soccer match is completely different than someone that's sitting up in the nosebleeds all the way at the back end of the stadium. It's still grief. We are still experiencing it, but my view of it is completely different than someone way up in the nosebleeds. And that's what people need to understand when you come across people that are dealing with grief. Yes, we all experience it having lost someone, but it's different viewpoints of it. Like, I lost a child that I was a stay-at-home caregiver for that had multiple special needs. My experience is completely different than, say, some of the people I've met in the grief community that may have lost their child to an overdose or a crime. They understand that. I don't. I understand mine, but they don't necessarily understand it. So, yes, we're all bound in this, but it's just different vantage points is what it comes down to. Now, as a man, when it comes to grief, society tells men that sure, you can grieve, but for a very short period of time. It's almost like society says, well, we'll give you the 3 bereavement days work gives you to grieve, but after those days, you need to get back to work. You don't necessarily get more than that time. Or a lot of men, they feel like, well, if I bury my head into work, then it will go away, which is the farthest thing from the truth. The reality of grief for men or women is the only way to get through it. The only way to get through grief is to actually grieve. And if you don't do that, you will never get through it. So society already tells man, well, you only got a short period of time. And once you get through that short period of time, you've got to go back as if nothing happened. You have to remain the strong one. You have to remain the provider, the protector, whatever other title we are as men providing for the family. As well as society teaches men, well, let me backtrack a little bit. I'm 47 years old, so I'm considered Generation X. And so my parents are the like boomers, that kind of thing. And I was taught from a very early age through what I see through TV, that kind of thing, that women's emotions come first, period. And for 99.9% of men, we're okay with that. We don't mind that the women in our lives are emotional. That's what makes you unique versus what we are. And we're happy for that. We want to provide, we want to be able to help, we want to, if you want it, give answers, solve problems, that kind of thing. That's just in the male DNA. But the underlying sentiment of that is women's emotion will always come first. And if there's anything left after everything that's done for the woman's emotion, there's room for men. And, you know, most men aren't going to come up to you and cry on your shoulder. The way
Mhm.
men grieve are like, they're meeting their guy friends in their man cave, or they're fixing cars, or they're at the bar, or some male bonding sporting event or something like that, because it's a commonality that you can be there and talk about things and not necessarily be ridiculed about it, if you will. The other thing that I say about women's emotion is one of the biggest signs that I tell people that it's still women come first. And again, that's fine for most men, is I can walk down my street that I'm on right now and I can pick a random house, and I guarantee you somewhere in that house is the sign hanging on the wall that says happy life, happy wife. And what that and again, all men want their wives happy, that we like to provide. It's just natural to us. However, what that tells men is if the wife ain't happy and everything's catered to them, forget what you're dealing with, forget what your feelings are, then nothing's going to go right.
You're
And
right. That's
so,
true.
I mean, again,
You're right.
I'm by no means bashing that by any stretch of the imagination. I just say that as because there are these subtle hints that most people don't pick up on
Yeah.
that we see all the time. And then wives and girlfriends and mothers and all that kind of go, well, why is he not open up? Well, society tells us we don't need to open up. That we've got to, I'm part of the you got to tape it up and walk it off generation, or rub some dirt on it generation, to where they say, are you hurt or are you injured? Because there's a difference. If you're hurt, you can get over it. If you're injured, you need to be sat out. And that kind of relates to grief as well. The other reason for grief is, and the reason why men don't open up in this world, is men don't want things. We understand that in relationship from time to time we will have arguments. It's the nature of just a relationship. But what men don't necessarily like is they don't want to open up and be vulnerable. And then 2 years down the road, the wife brings it up just to throw it back in their face to harm or hurt them in some form or fashion. That's probably the biggest reason why men don't open up, because a lot of us in multiple relationships throughout our lives, at some point, something we have said in confidence has been thrown back in our face as a way to hurt us because of the way the partner is feeling in that moment. And we, you know, kind of like a baseball analogy, men will give most a situation 3 strikes and then you're out. And what women need to understand is, yes, both sides matter. Yes, both sides has their side to tell and their feelings. But if you're using the information as a weapon towards your spouse, men are going to take that 2 or 3 times, and then they're going to get to a point where they're just not going to open up. And then if you come back and go, well, why is he not opening up? We need to look back at how you were during those moments, is what it comes down to. Um, probably the last thing for men is both sides. I'm catering this as like women do it, but both sides do this. We have to learn how to listen and not listen to respond. And there's a difference. If you're listening to respond, you're only going to get kind of the Cliff Notes version or the edited version, and you're just going to go off the bits and pieces you hear versus hearing the whole picture. And that's a lot of the communication, especially as it relates to emotion and grief and trauma, when it comes to getting men to open up. And that's what I, at least through this page and through the book I'll talk about in a minute, I'm trying to relay to men and women, is we've got to come to a middle kind of safe ground to be able to understand that we both have sides, we both have feelings, we both have needs, we both need to feel safe in this situation to be able to open up to it. And if we don't, it's not going to happen. Men, the two biggest thing men are about when it comes to these scenarios are trust and respect. If they don't get either of those, they will not open up. It's just it's that cut and dry. If men feel like they can't trust you and they're getting disrespected, they're not going to open up. So one of the reasons why I created Letters to Zachary was because initially I tried to look for men that had lost a loved one and I couldn't find them. So I created Letters to Zachary as kind of a safe space for men to come, for me to be able to post my content relating to grief and emotion, for them to be able to comment on and not feel like they were going to get bashed or ridiculed about. And then once that happened, I thought I still have it for men, but then I opened it up to anybody that had lost a loved one, whether it was a mother, a father, a spouse, a child, anything relating in grief. And then I kept all that. And the last like evolution of it, which I'm currently at, is I opened it up for women to give them some insight in how at least me as a man grieves, so that they can understand, so that when they go back to their husbands, boyfriends, whatever male in their family, I can give them some insight of what that man is thinking about, how he's processing it, how she needs to approach it, what she needs to do in those moments, whether to be gentle about it or maybe a little assertive about it. And so that's kind of all what Letters to Zachary is. Because at the end of the day, instead of me sitting there getting upset and complaining about, well, I don't have a group that with men in it and there's no men out there, I just said I'm going to create one, and to be the example. Now, do I do it perfectly all the time? Not even close. Do I make mistakes at it? All the time. But I'm open and transparent about it to say, hey, this may or may not work, or this is what happened, or just something related to my emotion. And to say, this is from my scenario, this is how I feel. I hope you can relate, is kind of how I put it on the page. And I do that in letter form. I do that in commentary form. I do that in short video form. I do that in meme form, even poetry form. I do it in. So it hits kind of several different genres of writing to appeal to more people that may like those different areas in the grief world. The last thing that I did was, I always knew that I wanted something tangible that I could hold in my hands, because I'm a very visual, tactile learner. And so originally I thought I was going to write a book, and then I kind of passed on that. And then I got in touch with the publisher at the Belmont City Press, who has been wonderful working with me. And we kind of brainstormed ideas. And she said, well, have you ever thought about doing a coloring book? And I thought, well, that's a unique idea. I'd like to consider that. And so we brainstormed ideas, and we came up with the idea of a coloring book as a way for adults, because adult coloring books have gotten popular recently, but as a way for adults to kind of have a de-stressing activity while they're dealing with their emotion, and as a way for parents to be able to talk to their children that may be remaining after a loved one passes away, to bond with them during this difficult moment, to talk about grief and trauma and sadness and sorrow and everything related to losing a loved one. Coloring would be considered a de-stressing mindfulness activity. And what I mean by that is it takes your mind off what's presently at hand and puts all of your attention on something else to give you mentally a break. And so the idea behind it was, let's say mama and daughter sit down, daughter's coloring. While daughter's coloring, it will give the mom time to be able to think of simplistic ways of trying to talk about grief and death and trauma, to try to get their child to understand kind of the concepts of what's going on. So it's meant to be a tool in kind of the whole grief process, is what it's meant to be. And the Letters to Zachary coloring book actually released today at noon. If anybody's interested, it's at letterstozachary.com. you can go there and it will direct you to where it's being sold at. So in 10 months, I've made a page. I've reached out to multiple communities and I've created a coloring book, all in the hopes to help at least one person.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for all that you've done so far. It's been very empowering. And I tell you, when I was listening, I'm like, oh my gosh, you cannot imagine. And I think it's sorry to say it, I think with the men most times, because I've interviewed a lot of men, I
Mhm,
noticed is they have a way of bringing their grief and channeling it into something that works and
mhm,
something that can also help other people,
mhm,
and I
mhm.
think that's a very good idea. That's
Sure.
a very good idea. And that is something. I think we interviewed Jason, a namesake too, who does something like the grief kits and all that, two
Mhm,
kids and all that. And it's so good. So there are just so much that people can do. And like we always say, in your moment of grief, sometimes it can be a way you can channel it to be better.
mhm,
You can channel it for your purpose. You can channel it for your good. Grief is not always bad, as we term it. It comes with its own issues, yes. But forget about the problems associated with grief and start looking at the solutions you can actually get from it. How can you help other people who are going through what you've been through? Because that is the only way to life. For us to be able to make this world a better place, we should be looking at solutions. We should be looking at things that can help us move from one level of our life to the next. We should be looking at how people can benefit and begin to see something different from what they are passing through. Because everyone gets into grief and they are stuck. They get into grief and they cannot move from that stage. And most times, one thing people don't understand is that those people that seem to be strong, those people that seem to be mm, doing all and pretend doing stuff like, oh, I don't care, I'm strong, I'm able to curtail it. Deep within them, they break down.
mhm,
And I'm a living witness to that. I remember everyone kept on saying, oh, she's strong, she's strong. And I kept on living the strong life
mhm,
until one day I could no longer take it. And when I broke down, I truly broke down. And I knew I needed help. I knew I needed to move from that stage where I was at to the next stage of my life. And today I am where I am. So there's nothing that is impossible with that. Grief to grace means that you can actually transit from grief and get into grace. And with the grace of God, you'll be able to move to the next stage of your life. You'll be able to have a purpose. When you listen to God and you begin to ask God, God, why did you call me? Okay, what is that lesson you want me to learn from this? Okay, how do you want me to translate this into purpose? I tell you, God will be able to help you. And like Jason said, he was just looking at the Facebook page or something or a reel, and the hit came in. So God can use anything. God can use all that you see around you to speak to you. So there is always something that God is talking to you about. If only you can give Him the chance to speak to you. If only you can listen more. If only you can, in your quiet moment, in your grieving moment, begin to see and seek His purpose and seek His grace and begin to ask Him, how do I help my community? How do I help the world? No, really, Jason, I tell you, I
Mhm.
want to tap into the grace of moving all around the world like you do.
Mhm.
I tell you, it's something that God can do anything in the season. Yours may not be to go around the world for global visibility. Yours
Mhm.
may just be for your immediate community. Yours may be for your family. Yours may be for your church. Yours
Mhm.
may be at your workplace. And I tell you, there is so much happening, even in our workplaces, so much grief. And that is why we cannot be productive. So begin to think inward, begin to think outside the box, and begin to look at it. Okay, this has happened and I cannot stop it. How do I now share what has happened? How do I help other people? It
Mhm.
is one thing that we need to learn. So, Jason, now can you share any moment of joy or peace that you experienced during your healing process?
Certainly. A lot of the joy that I've experienced has been just a lot of the responses I have gotten from just the content that I've written, because I wrote it to get emotion out, but I also wrote it to let my son know how I still felt about him, even though he wasn't with us. And with the fact that what I was saying to my son made so many other people remind them of their loved ones, or it reminded them of something with them, that brought me great joy.
Wow, thank you. Because that's it. I was reading some of your articles and they're really so meaningful. There are things that we need in this season
Mhm.
because it helps. It's really going to help. You need to go check it out. Letters to Zachary, whatever stage you are at right now, yours may not be death, yours may not be what he's been through, but I tell you, most men are grieving. I meet a lot of men these days who are grieving, especially the economy. They are grieving their work. Most of them don't have satisfaction where they are. And like he said also, some of them are feel they are in the wrong place, you know, and
Mhm.
they just keep grieving. They just keep grieving all that. And if only they will listen now that you need to the wife you have, you need to like give her the enjoyment for you to have the peace,
Mhm.
you know. So if you are grieving in whatever way, really I want you to go read these letters, these articles that he has in a letters um to Zachary. Is something you need to read. You really like it. You can subscribe, you can like the page, and you will be so grateful that you did that. So, what are your hopes for the future, and how has your grief journey influenced them?
My hope is to continue growing the community I've got, because the goal ultimately is, sure, we would all like a little bit of notoriety as it comes to that, but the reason why we would like is because the more maybe notoriety we have means the bigger reach we have. And that's, even though that may be the underlying reason for some people, for me that's the main reason. I want to be able to have the reach so that I can reach as many people as possible. Um, with the fact that initially I got the response that I did, it tells me that there's something, whatever I'm doing, there's something out there for it, because I continue to grow with whatever my style is through the grief experience. And my hope is just to keep growing, uh, doing what I'm doing, whether that's more podcasts or maybe TV shows, or continued writing or public speaking or any one of those areas. for me, it's more about getting it more out to the people, because, as the old saying goes, none of us get out of this life alive. If you're not dealing with grief at this point, you will at some point. And it's something that we need to become more comfortable talking about, because it's a natural process of life. Um, with that being said, this the influence for me is just, it keeps the drive going, because at the end of the day, grief, for anybody dealing with grief is draining. Even, don't get me wrong, I love what I do and I'm glad I'm helping people, but it's still a draining topic to do every day, and to be able to talk about trauma and death and how to deal with it and emotion. And again, I enjoy doing it, but it's by the end of the day, when I lay down, I'm out, because it's there's a lot of energy involved with it. So what I've done at this point is what drives me to keep growing it. I guess is how I'm answering that.
Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Are you
Can you
there?
hear me?
I can, but it's breaking up.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, because okay. Thought I lost you or something. Okay, thank you so much. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I love all that you've talked about today, and it's been very insightful. And I know that the God that has kept you thus far is going to keep you and is going to help you in this journey and help you and your family to be able to move on and get the right footing as you continue to grow in Jesus' name. So thank you all for joining us today. And I'm really excited because we've learned so much. We've learned so much in this journey. And it's been a very unique journey for Jason. And I know that the God that has kept him is also keeping someone. Someone that is listening to us today. Someone that is almost losing it all. Someone that is losing hope and believing that he cannot get to the next stage of his life. Someone that is almost trying to end it at this moment. Don't worry, there is always light at the end of the tunnel. Keep pushing, keep moving, and like I always say, the grief for caregiving most times, special needs kids is more than enough to add it to the grief of the death of a special needs child. So you can imagine it's more like, oh my gosh, all my efforts all the years. Is that how you felt, Justin?
Say that one more time.
Okay, I said the grief from taking care of the special needs kids all the
Uh-huh.
years, 12 years, and now losing the special needs kids. It looks like, oh my gosh, it's
Hmm.
just like I wasted all my time all these years. But I know that Zachary is all there watching and he knows that you love him and he did the best. So I was asking, is that how you felt? Because I know you can, I wanted to encourage someone who is going through that this moment, who is beginning to feel, oh my God, how do I keep moving in this season? I know that you've been through it and you'll be able to help them.
Um, no, I mean, I by no, if I understood the question right, I by no means thought that it was a waste at all. Um, every experience that we go through in life makes us who we are, and every challenge that we have, we either learn something about something that we couldn't do, or learn something that we could do. So in the special needs life, for most of us, there's a lot of challenges. There's a very steep learning curve. Um, as for the grief part of it, um, as much as I hate that I lost my son lived a full 15 years of life, and he was a very laid back, happy child. He fought everything he went through. Um, my son made me a better person, and for that I'm eternally grateful. Um, grief. Yes, grief is sad, but grief can also be positive, and grief can be happy per se. And the happy moment from that's what I tend to take out of his life, is the fact of, I was meant to be there to teach him things, but the reality is he taught me so much more. Even through his passing, and through this 2.5 years of grief journey that I've been on to this point.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. So now you heard from him, and that is how you should take it, because in every grief journey, there's a lesson to learn. We are here to grow, and it's always going to help us grow in all as we keep moving in our grief journey. Thank you so much for joining us today. And please do not forget to pick up our book, A Pen That Writes Grief. And if you need it, we have it on our website, and you can also get it on all platforms. Also, you can DM me and I can send you a graphic copy. So thank you so much for joining us today. We also have our apparels that are out, and if you need one, you can find them on our website. And like I said yesterday and the other day, I said we have a website. We're rebranding our website, and it's going to be live soon. And again, so that you have all this stuff in one place. Thank you so much for joining us in Grief to Grace today. And thank you, Zachary, Jason, for joining us. And please don't forget to pick up the book, the coloring book, because I think that's a very good tool. Like you said, when you're grieving, you need to do a lot of activities, and that's what our book also is all about, trying to help you do activities that can take you from distract you from whatever you're going through at that point. And I think coloring is one thing that can help you get distracted from whatever thoughts that you have. So please, for your kids, for yourself, get the coloring book, and you can get it on his website, and it's showing on the screen right now. And I tell you, you will not regret having it. And if you, for those listening, it is latest to zachary.com. So when you go there, you'll be directed on how to get these books. And thank you again and again for always showing up. For those who want to share their stories, like I always get messages, how do I share my stories? Please, if you have someone who wants to share, or you know somebody who needs to share, or you want to share your story, you can DM me at Ruth Hephzibah, and I will definitely give you a guide on how you can go about it. And also, you can send us an email on grieftogracenow at gmail.com. Thank you so much for joining us again on this episode. And till we meet again, remain blessed. And I'm not going to leave without giving you our Bible quote for today. And our Bible for today is one that we all read, and that is John 3:16. That for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And those who believe in him will not perish but have eternal life. So if God could give his Son, then you can give more. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I know you need to give your life to Christ, reach out with Bible in church and give your life to Him, because that is what you need in this season. Thank you, and God bless you. You have one last question before I close it, Jason? Okay,
What's
thank
that?
you.
Oh,
I
thank
said
you
you
for
have
having
one
me.
last. Yeah, thank you. Bye.